Services Committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. First up is verification of the meeting posting. Julie?
It's been posted.
Excellent, thank you. Next up is opportunity for public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
Not tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. First under the action items is motion to approve minutes as presented. We're looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Alrighty. So I'd like to welcome our newest member to the committee, Mrs. Voigt. She's moving into that role. We appreciate her taking the time to do the work. Thank you very much, Diane. I appreciate it. Next up is discussion information items. First up is the RBHI update. Mark, good to see you again.
Good to be seen.
I like these meetings because I get to see you so much.
I did tell the group that Mark, during summer was pulling the weight for the team in
Yes.
student services, so thank you, Mark, again for that.
You're welcome.
So Mark's here to give an update on all the work around the RBHI work that we've been doing behind the scenes, just to share some updates. So
Excellent.
I'll turn it over to him.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have had 2 meetings with the group from Merit and RBHI in the last few weeks to talk about implementation of the process. Just as a refresher, we will begin the process at East, and we picked a date, which is November 6th. So that'll be the initial date of administration. Right now, the current enrollment at East is 70 students, although I will tell you from my experience that can go up on a daily basis as referrals come in. But that's a small enough sample size to, number one, help us to understand the process, and number two, not overwhelm us at the same time as we work through it. So we will work to screen those students. The first step in the process was to create what Merit and RBHI call a school champion. That's someone in the building who's trusted by the students to take them through the actual process itself. That we chose Jody Ebbinger Bentley, who is the school social worker and AODA coordinator there. She's also a trusted resource for the students, and so we thought she would be a good fit. She's done about 90 minutes of training with Merit and RBHI on the app, the process, and so on. And then from there, we will coordinate that November 6th date. I have a number of social workers from the other high schools who will be in attendance, first of all, to observe the process, but second of all, to help out in case it would happen to be needed. Messaging to parents for the opt-in process will go out in the coming days. We're working on that right now. That'll go out in both English and Spanish to all of our families at East, so that they will have the opportunity to opt in to the process. I assume that's going to happen on several occasions between now and November 6th, so that there are multiple opportunities for parents to say that, yes, they would like to have their students screened. So that's where we're at as of right now.
Mark, will that be electronically disseminated to the parents, or will it be in form of a letter, or what?
Electronically.
Okay.
That would be the goal, yeah. And if we need to, we may take that a step further with some personal contact. The folks at East, East prides itself on parent communication, and so it is not at all unusual for East to email directly, text, or call parents as needed. They do a great job with that. Just as an aside, this is kind of a neat thing that's happened recently is with the new updates to our phone system, our staff can now text through WebEx, which is a great opportunity. I mean, in the past, individual staff may have, given a parent their personal cell phone number, which I understand the pluses and minuses of all that, but now staff can do that through WebEx, which is just a great resource, and they've had a lot of success with it.
Yeah. Mark, can you remind me what the target participation is? What are we hoping will be the percentage of students who?
Oh, I'd love to have 100% participation. I don't know that that's realistic, given, the parameters, and just trying to get parents to, and then there will be parents who I'm sure will say, that's great, but not for me, and that's
Right.
fine. But I would hope our goal would be 50% or greater.
Okay. As new students come in, will there be additional screenings for those new students that come in, or are you just going with whoever's enrolled on?
We'll likely have to go with whoever's enrolled at that time, because the resources on the back end of the screening process, where the student, if a student is flagged as being in the red zone, so to speak, we have to have those resources to bear at that moment. This isn't something where we would say, oh, we'll contact you in a few days. I mean, this is going to happen that day. And so we want to make sure that we have those resources available at that moment.
Thank you.
But if someone does enroll after the first screening, there is a plan to come back around the screening later in the school year. So we
great.
would be able to catch any students, but again, they would have to be enrolled at that time.
Right, but it's not as if that's something that will happen as they enroll in. It would be
Correct.
like a second enrollment period.
Yeah, correct. Or a second, screening session. That's really what we're planning for, and hoping to see growth from those students who do participate in it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You did mention, I didn't hear all the schools that you said would also maybe be there to observe. Is it all the high schools
High
that are
schools.
going to?
Yep, that's
Now-
who's been invited at this point.
Okay, because this is rolled out as early as seventh grade, if I recall, is that right?
I don't recall if that was my understanding was the initial parameters were the high schools
Okay, okay.
for this
That wasn't
particular
right.
screener.
Okay. Yeah, so not the, all right. Maybe I'm thinking of something else then. So then they'll be observing and, okay.
The trafficking program that they're going to do, that starts at.
Oh, that was, that could be what I'm thinking of. Thank you.
Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'll hand it off to my colleagues in just a moment.
I really want to say thanks to Mark and Jody and, just Sue Poppy, the principal at East, for just collaborating around this. It's, it's something new is always, can be a bit challenging, but they've done an awesome job of just being really planful for students and families. So thank you.
All righty. Next up, under discussion information items, is special education update.
So tonight, while you met some of our new directors at a full board meeting and they were introduced, I do want to introduce them again. So tonight we have joining us Lisa Paulin, who's the Director of Secondary Special Education, and Hadassah Robinson, the Director of Elementary Special Education. Both of these women have been just tremendous adds to our team. Part of what they'll be presenting on tonight is a little bit of an overview of special education. I remember as I was coming into the role and meeting with individual board members, and there were some new board members, we had some conversations around, what is special education? What are the parameters within that and within student services? So some of the information tonight will address some of those questions. And then part of the information shared tonight will really be about the work that we've been doing this summer. And granted, these ladies started in July. So it's been a lot of work, but I'm super proud of the team coming together and developing such a great plan that they'll be sharing with you tonight. So I'll turn it over to them and I'll airplay the presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a special education overview with the board and our community. We're really excited about it.
Just give me a second, but of course, the minute I go to do something, then it's like, it says I'm offline. Just pause one moment,
Okay.
please.
All right, so the next slide is going to give you an overview of special education. So in the School District of Waukesha, students who have been referred and qualified for special education receive services provided through their individualized education plan, which is a plan that describes the student's level of functioning, disability-related needs, developing goals around those disability-related needs, and then identifying and providing specially designed instruction and program summary and supports to help them be successful in the regular education setting with their peers. No, that is just students that have qualified as students with disabilities in the district.
When a student qualifies for special education, they're identified as having either a primary area of disability and possibly a secondary area of disability. And so those areas of disabilities are identified through the referral and evaluation process. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And the next one, please. Thank you. That's okay. So we have areas of disability. So we have significant developmental delay, other health impairment, autism, specific learning disability, which can be in the area of math or reading, intellectual disability, emotional behavioral disability, low incidence disabilities, which include traumatic brain injury, orthopedic impairment, blind and visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind. And we also have the area of speech and language.
And that was a lot of different areas of disability, so we're now going to give you an overview of each of the disability areas that we mentioned on this slide. So students that are identified as other health impairment have limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to a health problem or condition, which could include students with ADHD, heart problems, or lead poisoning, just to name a few areas. Students that are labeled significant developmental delay are students ages 3 through 9 who experience significant delays in the areas mentioned of physical, cognition, communication, social, emotional, or adaptive development. Students with specific learning disabilities is a disorder of the psychological processes that impact their academic progress, particularly in the areas of reading and math. Students with autism experience a developmental delay that affects social interactions and often communication. It can also adversely impact their educational performance. Often students that are diagnosed with autism thrive on routines and patterns.
Intellectual disability is our students with the most significant needs and limitations, both in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior skills, including social and practical adaptive skills, such as putting on clothes, bathroom routines. Emotional behavioral disability is frequent and intense observable behaviors over a long period of time or on a sudden onset of those behaviors due to an emerging mental health. Those behaviors can occur in multiple settings, including academic and non-academic environments such as school, community, and in the home. Our low incidence disabilities are our blind and visually impaired students, our deaf of hard of hearing, our deaf blind, our orthopedic impairment, and traumatic brain injury students. Students in special education received individualized education plans, and these plans include special education services. And so I'm going to go through all of the different services that are provided in an IEP or educational plan. We have specially designed instruction, and that's specifically specially designed, provided by a special education teacher that targets the student's area of disability. The next category is related services, and those are support services required to assist the student with disabilities to benefit from special education. So those may include your occupational therapy, physical therapy, transportation, and speech and language services. We then have supplementary aids and services. And these are aids, services, and supports to enable a student with a disability to be in an educational setting with students without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. The next category is program modifications or supports for school personnel. And these are really targeted to our staff, our school staff, on the behalf of the child. So those may include consultation with related services, consultation with special education teacher, and/or consultation with a health plan.
And one of the areas that we wanted to highlight is other health impairment. Again, that's having limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to a health problem. Of the 11,372 students in the school district of Waukesha, 1,966 have identified as students with disabilities. 22.57% of the students identified with a disability in the school district of Waukesha were identified in the area of other health impairment. And this slide is giving a historical 10-year perspective that we took from WISE-Local. You can see it has the total number of special education students as well as the total number of students that were identified as other health impairment from 2013 through the start of this school year. And as we look at strategic actions that we have been planning for, Hadassah and I are going to work with our department chairs. A department chair is a special education teacher at each of our sites that is a leader for their teams, where we are meeting with them at least once monthly to talk about processes, potential professional development, any bulletins from DPI. We're going to be working with them to identify the current services that are being provided for our students that are identified other health impairment and gather that information. And once we've gathered that information, next steps may include what are we currently using to provide services for our students that are other health impairment, and are there other resources or materials that we need to provide them in order to continue to make sure that we are meeting their educational needs based on their individual education plan. And with that, by the end of 2024, all student service team members and department chairs for special education are going to participate in a book study where we're going to work on common understanding and tools to use the root cause to support the writing of IEP goals and services for our students with other health impairments. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
If I may. So when I first saw the presentation and some of the numbers, they were, I don't know, I guess staggering to me that there seems to be a big rise just in the last few years. The data only goes back to 13, 14. So are you seeing a greater increase just in these last few years, or does it kind of step up this way if we were to go back even further? Looks like it's jumping up a few percent every few years. Mm-hmm. Has that been the trend over, say, the last decade, or has something accelerated? Is it just diagnosis, or is there really more cases? I know I'm kind of just asking some very general things.
I can try and you guys can fill in. Really, like I think I was this former special ed teacher. So just from my personal experience, I think it was a combination of things happening, which that's where we can't really point to one thing, but whether it's the student need changing over time, whether it's more identification, as they talked about the strength, vitality, and alertness, our evaluation teams, coming together and really making sure that the students who are given a special education label truly need that and are identified in whatever area. What we're sharing is the other health impairment area. Sometimes, as a special ed teacher, it was kind of like the catch-all area, and that we're seeing more students identified in other health impairment I'm not saying it's good or right or wrong, but it's something we want to investigate, and we want to make sure that we have resources and instructional resources to ensure that we're addressing the root cause of why that student has that IEP. So that's where that book study will come in. So the numbers increasing over time, I can't say that it is to one specific thing or COVID or this or that. I can just say that throughout the last decade or more, we've not just our school district, but around the state, we've seen more special education students and an increase in students in the area of other health impairment. We are not the only one to see this increase.
So of the increase, do we have a sense of how many of these students are coming into the district perhaps as new students, or are they being, you know, as changes going on within the population right now? Do we kind of have an idea?
That's really what the work will be about. Our first step will be to first look at and have some conversations around current services. So what are those special education services that the students are being provided, and what are the goals, and what instructional material is being used? From there, really, that's going to develop into our next step. So I'm not sure kind of where that's going to take the team. They might be needing more resources, but we may see a trend looking at some of our younger learners. We may see a trend, I'm just making this up, we may see a trend looking at our students with significant developmental delay going to then be identified as other health impairment. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm just saying we need to look and investigate more to determine if they're coming in, if throughout the evaluation process more are being identified, if there's targeted like grade levels, you know, or even elementary or middle. So that will be part of the work, is first starting with what are we doing, what are the IEPs saying, what instructional resources are we using, and then once we have that, digging a little bit deeper to develop our next steps and investigate.
Just kind of a follow-up on that. So I know what you're trying to do is get at the root cause of why this is happening, which obviously needs to be done. Just generally, though, we're not seeing other students from other districts maybe that are coming in, or people from other places moving here that are, we don't really know that. We're trying to find that out.
We do have students that do transfer into the school district of Waukesha. We don't have specific numbers as far as how many that is or a historical perspective on that, but I know that we've processed quite a few transfer IEPs for new to district students for this school year. So we do have students that are moving from other areas that have already been identified as a student with special education and an IEP that are moving to Waukesha.
Okay.
And just to add on to that is we have students that are within our system that when you have an individualized education program, you go through 3 years and then you're up for a reevaluation. So we are also going to be investigating, like, as students that are within our district that are growing and learning with us, looking at those reevaluations and looking at those areas of disability that they already have and what are we reevaluating them, and then looking at that trend as well. So there's a lot of different factors and root causes for that. So that would be the work that we're going to be really embarking on this year.
Thank you. I'd like to kind of dovetail on some of the stuff Mr. Zenobia came up, because I kind of zeroed in on some of the same stuff in the data. So I'm just going to try to drill in a little bit further. So, you know, just to kind of provide some actual numbers behind what Mr. Zenobia alluded to. In 2013, 2014, 2.7% of our enrolled students were identified as special ed. That number is up to 17.3%. And that's about a 500% increase from a percentage standpoint. And just in total numbers, we've gone from 364 students out of 13,678 to almost 2,000 students out of 11,000. So we're seeing this dramatic increase. At the same time, we're seeing, you know, declining enrollments. I guess I'm curious as to, have there been changes in laws or changes in things that are classified as special ed that maybe we were not part of the identification process 10 years ago? And if so, are there specific ones, and is there a specific period of time when, and I'll just pull something out of the areas of disability. I don't know if this is valid or not, but let's just take emotional behavior disability. Has that always been considered a diagnosis for special ed going back to 2013, 2014?
Yeah, and
It has, okay.
Yeah, this is not the only reason, but I did teach special education for 16 years prior to taking on some different roles. I think one thing that did change during my time as a special education teacher is the multi-level systems of supports, where we were identifying students based on the district and state assessments that were many times below the 25th percentile in reading and math, and then designing tiered interventions for those students. And part of those interventions were if we were seeing progress, then they were, I don't want to say placed back, they were already participating in the regular education curriculum, but then receiving an additional intervention in reading or math. If we saw adequate growth, that student was back in the general education curriculum. If you didn't see sufficient growth, they would do a tier 3 intervention, and at the end of an usually 8-week period, if that student hadn't made sufficient growth, that might be a time that you're looking at, is this a student with a disability? And that may have led to some more referrals based on the implementation of that process. That's definitely not the complete number, but I think as well with other health impairment, I think, you know, students are more, I don't want to say easily diagnosed, but I think doctors are starting to see, you know, more ADHD, or if there's a heart condition, you know, how do they best access the curriculum to meet their needs? And sometimes that's a 504, and if the need is significant enough, sometimes that becomes an individualized education plan.
Great. So if I can kind of restate what I think I heard you say, it sounds to me like what you're suggesting or indicating is we and a number of other people that are involved in that child's development and growth are looking for and identifying places where they need additional support, where we may not have been as good at it, or may not have looked as hard, or may not have known as much 10, 12 years ago. We know that now, and that's part of what's driving, or maybe a big driver in the increases we're seeing. Is that a fair restatement, I think, of what I heard?
It could be. I mean, like, we're just sharing our experiences,
Sure.
you know, but as far as the number of areas of special ed, that has been the same. And I look at Diane because she, you know, has that special ed license. So that the areas have been similar. I think from the state perspective, they've enhanced our decision-making process for, rather than going from a discrepancy model for students with specific learning disabilities, the state put in place the multi-tiered system of support that Lisa was talking about. So prior to going to special ed, they required us to do interventions, which is a good thing.
Sure.
We want to avoid special education putting a label on a student.
Absolutely.
The other area that we've seen a change is in the emotional behavior disabilities. People are now required to do a functional behavior assessment. When I first got out of school, that was a you can do, you might do, but it was the best practice to determine if you're addressing root cause for that student's behavior. And now, fast forward, it is a required part of the evaluation process. So while the areas of disability have stayed the same, I think the state has done some improvements of our decision-making around it and guidance. And because the goal is not to have a ton of special education students. We want to properly identify, you know, the right students and get them the right needs.
Sure.
That helps.
So if I could.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so one of the things I did note was looking at the numbers that we have for this year, and I assume we're pretty solid in the numbers after our third Friday count. Are these, you feel comfortable that these are good numbers?
These are preliminary numbers. This is not from our third Friday count.
Oh, it's not, okay.
But it's preliminary enrollment numbers based on our student information system. We have the official count as far as head count and enrollment. Darren will be sharing that at Finance and Facility. But
So the reason I wanted to ask about it was I noticed that the increase in total special education students was the lowest year over year that we've seen during this time, and the number of OHI identified students. Is that a function of where we are in the school year, or is there something else that may help us understand why we're seeing maybe a flattening of that upward trend? Or if you don't know, that's fine too. Maybe you haven't had a chance to look that closely. I'm just curious.
Just being a part of the system here in the school district of Waukesha, I think we've done a lot of work around our Tier 1 universal instruction with all of our new curriculum over the past couple of years that we've had in the elementary, middle school, and high school. And I think that I have not run the numbers and I have not done that research part of it. But I know that is definitely a factor, having our students be a part of that Tier 1 universal instruction, and the rigor is very important. And so that could be a contributor. Again, I haven't done the research, but just being in the district, being a part of the work, I know that definitely has affected our students in a positive way.
Right.
As far as the timeline, I do want to add that a special education evaluation and the student qualifying for special education, it can happen at any time. It's not the school year starts. So we're always evaluating, we're always reviewing IEPs, so.
Just to add too, is parents have the right to also request a referral for their child. So that's also a factor that's, that's something to consider as well as we're going through the process of looking at these referrals and looking at students and who is able to refer them to special education. So parents do have a right in that as well.
So these numbers might look quite different at the end of the year after we've had a chance to get those referrals in or do our own identification. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Voigt?
When I retired, the number of special ed students is nowhere near the number they are today. And I was just very, very surprised to see the stats here. And other health impairment back in the day was a very small number of students that were, with that label in the program. What, just as a kind of best guess, what do you attribute it to? Why would it be such a dramatic increase in that? Because it used to just be a catch-all kind of, and I would not have associated it with all the specific things that are listed here. So I'm sure it's an improved definition, definitely over the last few years. But what do you think is just a?
Truly, that's $1 million question. I mean, we can share with you our experiences and what we think, as we've kind of shared. It might be a catch-all area. We might be over-identifying. We might not have the right instructional resources to dismiss students out of OHI, where we might have stronger resources in the area of reading and math. It could be so many things, but I think the work that we've outlined is the right work to be doing to ensure that our students, we're not, all those things. We're not over-identifying. We're ensuring that they're learning and growing and, dismissing, as soon as possible. And you guys can share what you think. I'm just saying, that is the $1 million question. We don't have the one, the one answer, the one solution.
I agree with Jen. Now, this is not, I did not do any research or run numbers on this, but during my years as a special education teacher, when we were looking at OHI, a lot of times we looked at the area of limited alertness, and that oftentimes was due to students that were experiencing some educational difficulties around ADHD or ADD. Mm-hmm. So I think that plays a part in that other health impairment identification. I'm not saying that that's the bulk of what we're seeing, but I did notice during my 16 years as a special education teacher, seeing that diagnosed by physicians and then looking at how that was potentially impacting that student's access to the general education curriculum, and then determining if they required specialized instruction.
My other question is, what book are you using, that you're thinking about using for the book study? Because I think I'd like to find out and be able to research with you.
Go ahead.
The title of the book is Causes and Cures in the Classroom.
I just want to mention that when I first saw these numbers, I was stunned at the increase, it's 3 to 5 times greater numbers in the last 10 years. And my last 8 years of, teaching in Waukesha, I know I've witnessed firsthand the increase. So I saw it myself with teaching every day and seeing the number of students, that we, had in the classroom trying to find, assistances for. I just had 2 questions. Jen, I think you mentioned it. Are you seeing this consistent of a rise, I think statewide and even national trends? Are other districts kind of seeing this, 3 times greater total in the last 10 years? Is that pretty consistent?
I would say from my experience in other districts, yes, we've seen an increase in the area of OHI. And sometimes people just don't know what it is. It's hard to put your finger on, but other districts have seen the similar thing of an increase of students.
Okay, and then that kind of leads me to my second question, my wondering, being a regular ed teacher, which I was for many, many years, many in the district, I found my last, 15 years of teaching, I really had to do a lot of learning myself when it came to special ed students, methods, needs, how can I as a regular ed teacher support them? What I'm wondering, and maybe you don't know, but this might be a great thing to maybe, I'll try to look into this. Are the local colleges or colleges in general, are they requiring their regular ed, general education teachers to have a little bit more training and background knowledge in special ed? Because I know when I first went through the program years and years ago, I didn't have any courses in that. And, I learned on the job my last, 15 years of teaching out of, 32. But, are the colleges now starting to address, students coming out, like even just with a general license, general elementary, middle school, are they starting? Are you seeing that there's more of an effort?
So twofold. So one is I worked at the Milwaukee Area Technical College, and they are also implementing different programs for adults with special needs and high functioning. So I know that at the technical level, they are seeing the need for adult learners. And then I also know that different area colleges have offered double certification in the area of special education and other areas. So I know that has, from my own personal experience talking to other colleges, that is offered locally. And so there is a need there.
I would add too that our new teachers that come to the district, we have a really robust professional development plan, and we know that everyone has different experiences and training from different colleges. And so, one of the new teacher sessions is on educator effectiveness, right? So, but later in the school year, these ladies will be presenting on special education. So we want to be sure that we're informing our new teachers and giving them some tools right away so that they can support the students and be our best partners, in this work to support the kids, so.
No, I appreciate the efforts that everyone's doing the district-wise, but I think colleges almost have to really start implementing some additional or infusing some additional training, with, different areas of needs, because, like you said, it's nice to be a new teacher, but then you're learning on the job, and that, I don't know if that's almost optimal either. So I hope that the colleges are starting to, do a little bit more with their actual program to increase that knowledge.
Any other questions? Mr. Watt?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm curious about is how do you measure, are there metrics you have that measure your success? How do you know how you're doing in terms of improving the outcomes for special ed students in the variety of different categories?
It's pretty hard to answer because as soon as we get the students in, there's also kids being dismissed. So it's always a revolving door. So every time there's a state assessment and you see there's about 15% of special education students, it's not always the same 15% from year to year. And we are designed to support the neediest learners. And once they get close to grade level, we want to be dismissing them. So that is a hard thing to measure based on number of students and that sort of thing. But we do think that we can investigate the area of OHI and what we're doing to maybe not have it be as much or similar to other areas, or at the very least ensuring that our teams of that are evaluating students have some root cause tools to truly dive deep into the student need. And then if they do qualify, to ensure that we have really strong resources to then focus on dismissing the students. But that is the trick with special ed. That's been the hard thing over time.
So if a student is dismissed from special ed, is that an indication that they have reached some set of goals that had been set at the beginning of the IEP process?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Zenobia?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up, Mrs. Kenning kind of hit on it at the beginning of her statement of other data being used in other districts. Do you see that to some level? Is that helpful if you get to see? I mean, you're probably not able to, drill down into any type of actual plans, obviously, but the overview of this stuff happening, are other districts creating, best practices, if you will, of how they're handling this, or is everybody kind of getting hit with this at one time? Is that helpful?
I'm new to Waukesha this year, so I can speak for the district that I came from. We did notice similar trends, just an increase in numbers. And in the district I came from, particularly developing plans around other health impairment and emotional behavioral disability. In the district I came from, those were areas where we had seen a higher increase in numbers than we had in other disability areas. And then we were working to develop plans of kind of looking at our referral process, making sure that we had the tools and materials that we needed, and then how are we progress monitoring and how are we going to determine if and when that student has met their goals in order to be dismissed from special education. And then also looking at, as a system, our universal supports at that tier 1 level implemented to Fidelity, and then are we implementing our tier 2 supports to Fidelity as well? So I can't speak to other districts besides my previous district, but something that we were investigating as well.
Just generally speaking, how, as far as the last slide here, mentions all the department chairs, how many of the staff are going to actually be part of the process, roughly, of trying to put this together?
The department chairs, there's one per building at all levels.
Okay.
So about 23.
Okay.
Then based on their work, they'll say, what are our next steps? Do then our department chairs provide some professional learning? That's just an idea, but we'll kind of have to just start small and, take it from there and try to apply some of our learning, as we're going.
All right, any other questions?
Just on that, it says by November you're going to begin this, maybe have something. Is there any possibility that you could come back in November? Maybe this is another business item to kind of update where you're at in the process.
For sure.
Yeah, we had talked about, we went back and forth of whether we would add another slide or not to the presentation regarding following up with everybody, but that would be our intent. In addition, I'll be using the Friday updates of just sharing a little bit more, on this. I don't have some of the numbers that we had talked about, but I can get them and share some of those. But just kind of bringing it full circle for everyone with some of the Friday updates that we provide to the board, and then coming back with a larger update once we have more information of here's what's working, here's our next step. And maybe then we can bring some of the department chairs though too with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. So just so we know, we have a policy actually that we do not accept special ed open enrollment students. So most districts have that, just because of the cost of a special ed student, but we have that. So when you were talking about transfers, we do not accept the open enrollment students. So we wouldn't accept a student from, say, Muskego that has an IEP. You have to live in this district.
Sure. Yeah. What happens if they are in an open enrollment, and then we identify a special ed need, and they're not a resident.
That's a great question.
I don't know.
Have we, I mean, I'm
It's different policy in different districts,
Yes.
so I'd have to look.
Okay.
But different districts approach it differently, but that's something I can look into and get back to you.
for sure,
Thank you.
definitely. Okay. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you, ladies, for taking the time.
Thank you for
Over.
letting us share with you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the conversation, too. This kind of was some of our individual conversations that we had that led up to that, so that was great, so I appreciate it.
Alrighty. Next up is other business, recommendations for future meetings. Obviously, you want to follow up to this in November or December, with the work, when does the work start, in November?
Yeah, it's going to start in November. If I can just kind of work with the team and look at their book study outline, maybe like late winter, we would come
Yeah.
back.
Okay,
Just with an update.
yeah,
But we could put that on the schedule.
fantastic. Or is anything else for future meetings? Mrs. Voigt?
I'm just wondering about busing, if that would fit into the category of student services.
It is.
You know, we tend to deal with it because of the contract at
Yes.
Finance and Facilities, so
Yes.
I'm very much aware of, you know, what the problems we're having right
Right.
now. But long range, would it be here for follow-up?
Long-range contract, the financial part would be. at
That's F&F still.
But if you had any specific questions regarding, say, special ed busing, what that looks like,
We can do a busing
Or-
update
yeah.
next week, or next month, not next week.
yeah, definitely. There's,
Because this
when I
isn't a
say the
long-range
busing
problem.
coordinator works with student services, doesn't she?
What?
Doesn't the busing coordinator work at student services? And-
We meet every day.
That's exactly right.
For
So,
student.
yes.
Yes.
so that'd be, put that on the next meeting, for sure, a busing update. Alrighty, anything else? Alrighty, thank you very much for your attendance and your time, and meeting adjourned.
Yeah, thank you.